A strong federation is better than division, but balance only exists when all parties possess meaningful negotiating power. Countries do not fracture when people feel represented. They fracture when people... And welcome back to the Citizen Podcast. I'm David Craig, your host. We are got a lot of things I want to review and go through, but we're going to spend the bulk of today actually talking about an idea as we see it growing more and more in Alberta and Canada, and there's becoming a lot more of a national conversation about this Alberta independence movement. We're seeing, obviously, mainstream media jump on board. You're seeing national commentators, national leaders starting to jump on board as well, entering the conversation. So there's a lot of things to go through, and I want to spend a little bit of time today discussing it from an angle I don't think has actually been hit that much, specifically for Albertans who are going to be voting in the referendum. We have had the honor on this show to have a lot of different people on exploring the possibilities, the ramifications, seeing what their opinions are from people from the APP, and most recently Keith Wilson a couple weeks ago. We've had Eva Chipiuk, and we've had a lot of different people talking about their stance and the different ins and outs and the interpretation of how this works. We're seeing a lot of things in the news. We're seeing things from First Nations groups. We're seeing things from Prime Minister's office. We're seeing things from former Prime Ministers like Jean Chrétien, and our national leaders are now starting to jump in. But there is something that I want to throw right off the hop. And here's a take for you. If you want a stronger Alberta to stay in Canada, you should probably vote in favor of having a referendum. And here's why. Because there's a conversation happening in Alberta right now that a lot of people are misunderstanding. And some, they're misunderstanding it accidentally, while there are others that are misrepresenting it intentionally to bring a lot of confusion. Because the moment anyone even mentions a referendum, the conversation immediately becomes emotional. And you're noticing people start yelling things in Canada like, you hate Canada, or you're trying to destroy our country, or you're a separatist. But I think that framing completely misses what is actually happening underneath the surface. Because for many Albertans, this referendum is not primarily about leaving Canada. And here's what I actually think it's about. I think it's about leverage. It's about balance. It's about autonomy of being in control of our own futures. And ironically, if you genuinely want Alberta to remain inside Canada long term, there's actually a very, very strong argument for voting in favor of having a referendum coming up in October to pursue these options. And I'm going to tell you why if you listen in for the long haul today, because we're going to go on a little bit of a rant about some thoughts, and I'll let you know where I stand on this and some of the things I've been analyzing after hearing a lot of people's opinions. But I think you should consider, if you want Alberta to stay in Canada, which a vast majority, that's my guess, of Albertans do, you should vote in favor of this October 19th referendum. Not because you want separation, but because you want Confederation to work properly again. And that's where I actually think that we need to start, because I don't think most Canadians have actually been taught what Confederation was supposed to be. Canada was never intended to be a unitary state where Ottawa governs every aspect of the life, while provinces function like regional managers. That was never the initial design, and our country is based on Confederation. See, Confederation was a federation, that's profound, a partnership where the provinces retained constitutional authority over major areas directly affecting all of our daily lives, like healthcare. You've got education, natural resources. There's a bunch of other, like property rights, municipal structures, civil law, local governments. All those type of things is what provinces manage. The federal government was meant to handle a lot of the national responsibilities, like you see things like national defense and trade, currency, international affairs, criminal law, national coordination across our country, etc. The entire point, though, of Confederation in our country was balance, not centralized control. I want to say that one more time. Not centralized control. See, the founders understood something important here in Canada, that a country as geographically large as Canada is, we're very culturally diverse, we're economically different as Canada can only function if power was distributed across. Because what works for downtown Toronto may not actually work here in rural Alberta. What works for Montreal probably doesn't work perfectly the same in Saskatchewan. And what works in Atlantic Canada may not work for the energy sector that's here in Western Canada. See, that was not considered dangerous. That was actually considered wisdom, that this balance of power between federal and provincial. See, strong provinces, were not viewed as a threat to Canada. They were viewed as essential to Canada. But yet, over time, something has drastically changed, where we have seen power increasingly centralized in Ottawa. We're looking at federal spending power expanded, bureaucracy expanded, regulation has been expanded, conditional funding expanded, and gradually provinces began operating less like equal partners in confederation and more like administrative branches of the federal government. Now, to be fair, this is not only an Alberta problem. This does affect every single province, as you're seeing some of these ideas in Quebec and other places starting to foster. But Alberta feels it uniquely becomes Alberta's economy because we are so resource-driven, so entrepreneurial, and also so connected to industries that it seems like Ottawa increasingly views through their ideological lens rather than their economic lenses. And eventually, we have to start asking very difficult questions. You and I have to start asking these questions. If provinces are constitutionally sovereign in key areas, why does it feel increasingly like Ottawa controls more than it should? If Alberta contributes massively to the national economy, why does Alberta feel consistently politically marginalized? And if the people of Alberta democratically speak, because that's what a referendum is, everybody, it's when they democratically speak, why does it feel like nothing changes? Now, hear me out. 2021, under Premier Jason Kenney at the time, we had a referendum on equalization. And get this, over 61% of Albertans voted to remove equalization from the Constitution. Now, there's a whole bunch of things you have to go through, but that wasn't just a fringe small amount of people that voted. That was a majority, a clear majority of Albertans that spoke, and that was a democratic mandate here in Alberta. What happened? Nothing. Jason Kenney wrote former Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, nothing happened. Nothing meaningful happened. He contacted the other premiers and nothing happened. See, this is what happened. The people of Alberta spoke clearly what they wanted to see in a system, being a part of a broader system in Canada. The system pretty much just shrugged its shoulders. And that's when many Albertans started to realize something pretty important, that there are some political actions that send messages, but there's other political actions that create leverage. The equalization referendum sent a message, but this potential referendum that we're looking at is designed, and what I believe is the real conversation, is to create leverage. And that distinction matters enormously for all of us to understand, because right now Ottawa understands and looks at something. No matter how frustrated Alberta gets, most people assume Alberta will ultimately stay. And if that is the assumption, if that assumption remains true forever, then why would Ottawa, meaning the federal government, their balance of power, why would they ever negotiate? Why would it voluntarily decentralize power in this country? Why would it discuss Senate reform? Why would it meaningfully revisit equalization payments in Canada? Why would it rethink energy policies? Why would it structurally rebalance Confederation when there's no leverage? You see, power rarely gives itself away voluntarily. It responds to incentives. And Alberta has had very little leverage over time. That's why this October 19th referendum on a referendum matters. Not because it instantly creates an independent country. I want you to hear that. It does not instantly create an independent country. It at the same time, voting yes in favor of it does not create new borders. It does not eliminate your pension. It does not cancel your passport. It does not force separation. It does not trigger an economic collapse. We reviewed that last week with Martin Pelletier. It creates leverage. I just want to sit on that for a second. It creates leverage. That is it. Whether you want Alberta to stay or to be completely independent, voting in favor to have a referendum creates leverage. I'm going to tell you why that's important. And that's frankly why I think a lot of people are nervous about it, because for the first time in a long time, Alberta may actually possess enough leverage to force a serious national conversation. Now let's talk about another example I think that is pretty important, and I think it perfectly illustrates this imbalance I've been talking about. See, there's infrastructure that we are working on in Alberta. Alberta recently unveiled the most serious passenger rail proposal in provincial history. It's a high-speed rail. I'm not sure if you've been following this, but it's between Calgary, it's between Edmonton. There's airport links, there's regional connections. It's a long-term vision for, guess what, the fastest growing corridor in Canada. Also an extremely productive province in Canada, the most important, I think, province in Canada when it comes to our economy. The projected cost of this was about $60 billion. Federal support committed, well, there essentially wasn't anything. Alberta put forward about $15 million of its own money just to begin the planning, pre-construction phase, all that stuff. Now, compare that to a federal government's Alto Rail project between Toronto and Quebec City. There's been billions in federal support already committed before construction has even begun. And this is the same country, but it's different treatment. Again, this is not simply just about resentment, it's about priorities. Now I know there'll be some differences. We can argue the nuances between that corridor and this corridor, but there is a process of going through where you are looking at prioritization in our country. Just a small example of many that we could give. But what I'm seeing and talking with lots of you as Albertans here, and people actually, it's not just Albertans, there's people across Canada who maybe have got the same idea of you love Canada, you want to stay a part of Canada, but you know that there is something amiss, there is something wrong, there is an imbalance in terms of how we should be functioning. And there's a lot of us, there's a lot of Albertans that increasingly feel like equal partners when taxes are being collected, but unequal partners when there's national investment or looking at energy or these different decisions that are made. And eventually people begin asking the question, what exactly is Alberta receiving in return for continually surrendering authority upward? That's a serious question. That's not just some victim mentality. And that question becomes even bigger when you look at the economy overall. And I'm not sure if you guys noticed this or saw this, but the Royal Bank of Canada released research showing that Canada has experienced staggering levels of lost investment over the past decade, particularly in there's these sectors connected to energy and productivity, developing our resources across the country. See, the thing what happens is capital leaves when uncertainty rises, and investment leaves, listen to this everyone, investment leaves Canada when regulation becomes unpredictable. Investment leaves when governments appear hostile towards the industries that actually generate wealth in our country. And Alberta has lived in this reality for years. With canceled pipelines and you see delayed approvals, there's regulatory uncertainty, 100% federal intervention in provincial resource development, that type of stuff. Now, just a little caveat, because we always want to be intellectually honest. Prime Minister Mark Carney and the government has done a lot to differentiate themselves from how Justin Trudeau and his government ran Ottawa and ran the country. And they've been putting MOUs forward, and we can debate over. Definitely, action is a lot better than words. We want to see actions, as actions speak louder than words. That's what I'm trying to say. But at the same time, we want to see real action, not words that are contingent on these massive ideological frameworks that actually are going to make things more expensive and harder to get our resources out. And when you look at these type of things with this intervention, you wonder why frustration is growing. Because Albertans are increasingly asking whether the current system we have in Canada is structurally capable of allowing Alberta to fully thrive. Now, I want to be very, very clear about something here. I still believe a strong Alberta inside Canada is the best outcome. I do agree with Premier Danielle Smith on that. And just a side note, just so Nenshi knows, Premier Smith, that's what she believes within Canada. She is not she's not trying to stop what a constitutional rule, a constitutional doorway that we have as citizens to actually be able to speak our voice by going to referendum, like a lot of politicians are trying to stop. A balanced confederation is better than fragmentation in Canada. A strong federation is better than division. But balance only exists when all parties possess meaningful negotiating power. And that's the case in Canada. And right now, many Albertans feel that balance is gone. I don't think it's not a feeling. It's actually truth. And underneath all of this is another growing concern. We'll get back to that train of thought in a second. But I wanted to take this little tangent on taxes, debt, government growth. Because across the Western world, we are seeing massive trends where governments are spending at extraordinary levels. You see debt rising everywhere. Bureaucracies are expanding faster in Canada than private enterprise. Productivity is slowing. Economic growth is weakening. And eventually, governments face hard choices. You saw the technical recession that we are in, and you've got political pundits like Andrew Coyne saying that's not really a recession. No, it's a technical recession. Sure, it might change next quarter if things change, but we are on clear trends here in Canada. See, the thing is, when you have all of those things going on, there's only a couple ways you can get out of it. You can cut spending. You can dramatically grow the economy, which doesn't seem like we're doing that anytime soon. You can inflate the currency, or you can raise taxes. Those are basically the options. And many Canadians are looking at current taxation levels. I know I am all the time and wondering if this is considered normal. What does if this is considered normal, what does the next generation face? What are my kids going to face? Higher income taxes, wealth taxes, more inheritance taxes, more payroll deductions, more carbon taxes? And at what point do productive people simply begin leaving? We're already seeing that happen. See, these are not radical questions. I just want to stop there for a second. These are not radical questions. Many people might try to spin it as radical questions. These are actually responsible questions. These are important questions because if we are not playing the movie out as to where we're going, then we are not being responsible citizens that we need to be in Canada. These are legitimate economic questions, especially in Alberta, where entrepreneurship, productivity, and private enterprise still matter deeply to our culture. And many people are so frustrated because it feels like Canada no longer even seriously discusses reducing the size or the scope of government. Why is no one proposing that? I would love to see that. Everything becomes about expanding programs, expanding bureaucracy, expanding administration, expanding dependence on government. But where is the conversation about making our lives affordable again? I know we got slogans, we got things thrown out. I want to know where the conversation is about creating so much economic growth that families actually keep more of what they earn. That's a thought. Where's the conversation about empowering our private markets, our entrepreneurs, our builders, our tradespeople, our innovators? What about our families? See, strong societies are not built purely through redistribution, even at all. It's not built through that. They're built through production. And this matters because Alberta's frustration is not ultimately anger. It's actually about control. Albertans increasingly want more authority over the future they are being asked to fund, more authority over taxation, more authority over infrastructure, more authority over our resources, more authority over economic policy. We want to have a voice more over our own destiny. And honestly, this should not scare us as Canadians because decentralization is not anti-Canadian. Let's say that one more time, everyone. So listen up. For people in the back, listen up. Decentralization is not anti-Canadian. It is actually foundational to Confederation itself. Strong provinces actually strengthen the country because local governments are closer to local realities. And what works for Alberta obviously may not work in Quebec. What works in BC may not work across the country in Nova Scotia. See, that diversity is not weakness. That is actually federalism. And maybe this referendum becomes the moment Canada finally has the conversation that we have avoided for decades. Has power become too centralized? Have provinces lost too much autonomy? Has Ottawa expanded beyond what Confederation originally envisioned? And if the answer is yes, maybe Alberta forcing that conversation ultimately helps every single province, not just Alberta. Maybe it helps rebuild a healthier federation. I'd love to see that. One where provinces, we are actually partners again. Imagine interprovincial trade. not subsidiaries of each other. Because in the end, this is not fundamentally about hatred towards Canada. Now, don't get me wrong. There are some people who have for sure gotten to that point. And you know what? Everyone is entitled to their own opinion. That's not where I stand. What this is about for me, and I think a majority of Albertans, it's about whether Canada still believes in the principles that we were founded upon, which is balance, autonomy, distributed power, regional representation in our country, and mutual benefit. And if Canada still believes in those things, that's a question I think every Canadian should ask themselves, whether you're in Quebec, whether you're in Ontario, whether you're in Newfoundland and Labrador, Yukon Territory. We should all be asking ourselves that question. And specifically, if you're in Alberta, as we move towards the summer, as we're going through the summer into October 19th, then this referendum should not be feared by you if you believe in those things. It actually should be listened to, because countries do not fracture when people feel represented. They fracture when people believe they have no meaningful control over the future that they are being asked to finance. And increasingly, many of us and Albertans feel exactly that, not because they hate Canada, not because we hate Canada. I love Canada, but because they want a stronger Alberta, a freer Alberta. I'd love to see a stronger Manitoba. I'd love to see a stronger every single province, a more autonomous Alberta, and ultimately maybe even a stronger Canada because of all of that. Now, I wanted to pose those thoughts to you because as we approach this, I started off by saying, if you want Alberta to remain in Canada, but you want Alberta to be strong, you want Alberta to be more economically prosperous, you want to be able to export and get Alberta's resources out to the world, you want to see money coming in to build and to grow, then there is a real strong case for you to vote in favor on October 19th to have a referendum about creating power and giving negotiating power to Premier Smith and the government to really create leverage between this relationship of Canada and the provinces, specifically Alberta in this case. And I believe this is not about separation, even though a lot of people 100% do. I'm not throwing that out the window. But what it actually does is it creates leverage. So whatever side of the fence you fall on about whether you're done with Canada and you want an independent Alberta, whether you want a stronger, more autonomous Alberta within Canada, we all actually should be voting yes to create that leverage, to create a stronger relationship, to bring back balance of power within our country. I think that's important. Let me know what you think in the comments. Love to know if you'd agree or disagree. Lots of stuff we've been digesting over the last several weeks. Alberta and Canada is going to continue looking at these major questions. Now, a lot of the questions I pose are really important, strong questions. I'm going to ask you to think on that. I'm going to ask you to put some serious thought in those questions because that, I believe, is part of our responsibility as citizens, to be asking the hard questions, to not be afraid of adversity, to not be afraid if other people have got differentiating opinions than you, even if they act superior, even if they act like they know more, even if you know what, just set all that aside. What do you think? Because guess what? You're a citizen in Canada. You have a voice. Each individual has one voice, one vote, their thoughts. So I'd love to hear it. Let us know in the comments. Thank you guys for hanging with us today. Today's a little bit of a different style of an episode, but there's just been a lot of things that have been percolating over the last months, and we've been connecting with a lot of different Albertans and Canadians as we've been traveling, and this is a growing sentiment, and it's not going anywhere, and I want to just kind of throw a couple thoughts in there to help prime the pump so that you can have your thoughts at the forefront. Be open to having these conversations at work as well. Thank you guys so much. Other than that, you know what to do. Hit the like button. Hit the subscribe button. Turn the notifications on for when we drop our episodes every single Friday. Follow us on all of our social medias. We so appreciate your support. See you guys next time. The show goes on.